Now, turning to our program, please welcome back up to the podium James Robinson, Managing Broker of Septentrion Properties, LLC, to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Leslie. So I've known our speaker today, Elysabeth Alfano, for over 10 years. We met through a mutual friend and quickly discovered we shared a mutual interest in business, the arts, and a variety of humanitarian causes. We both love to travel, and we began organizing sailing trips in various places around the world. And when you're stuck on a boat for 10 days with someone, you really get to know them pretty well. So we had some great conversations. Wide-ranging conversations about everything from the global economy to pop culture to serious topics like climate change. In February of this year, we spent 2 weeks in Kerala in southern India. We were at a tiger reserve. The park ranger showed us the direct effects of climate change while we were there. He described animals that once lived in the reserve and that had not been seen in years and believed to be extinct, having lost their habitats and food sources. After a full day of trekking through the reserve, Elysabeth and I began talking in detail about her work with food system innovation and how small changes in the food system could yield significant improvements for both human health and the environment. I was so intrigued by our conversation that I thought it would be something that our club members would be interested in. So here we are. Elysabeth is the CEO of VegTech Invest, an advisor of the Plant-Based Innovation and Climate ETF that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. She's an expert in investing in food system transformation and speaks internationally on the intersection of investing, sustainability, and our global food supply system. She recently spoke at the UN Global Leaders Compact Summit, the UN Climate Change Summits COPs 27 and 28, Yale University, and several Bloomberg intelligence events. Elysabeth began her career at the Kellogg Company. She is a graduate of Northwestern University and the Thunderbird School of Global Management. She consults and advises C-suite executives on the sustainable food industry landscape. She is also host of the Plant-Based Business Hour, a podcast which features the CEOs and business leaders in the industry. In addition, Elysabeth is the voice of sustainability for the New York Stock Exchange. She hosts the only sustainable investing podcast on their platform called The Upside and Impact, Investing for Change. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend and travel partner, Elysabeth Alfano.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you all for the work you do. Thank you all for being interested in making the world a better place. No matter what we learn together today, and we are going to do it together today. We're going to fix the global food supply system in a half an hour. I do want to thank you for all your work. We're going to see that a lot of what we look at when we look at the global food supply system addresses these four-way tests of the Rotary Club of Milwaukee and Rotary International. You're going to see how much food, as we all know, ties into our every lives. And we're going to figure this out together. So thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, James. I do love you. Yes, okay, so I'm the CEO of VegTech Invest. I have an ETF on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm not really going to talk about that, but I am going to talk about investing towards the end of if we're shifting the global food supply system, what does this look like for all of us? And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions. So I'm really happy to dive into that. So you can start thinking about your questions now because it will get juicy. But before we get into any of this, let's take a step back and look at the global food supply system. We just had a great lunch. We walk into Costco, we've got food. What's wrong with our food supply system? What could possibly be wrong? Every time we go into a restaurant, looks great, the food's great, there's no food supply issue here. Do we have a problem? It turns out that actually we do. The global food supply system, enormous, 9.4 trillion. Now you've seen data that it's 16 trillion or 8 trillion. Let's go with 9.4, so many numbers there. Shifting towards sustainability. Why? Again, what's wrong with our food supply system? The thing is, we need to create more food that is more nutritious, using fewer resources, that takes less time and causes less damage. That's what we're figuring out together today. This is the business equation that we are solving. And this is, of course, where business shines, right? Business takes a problem and it solves it at scale. That's where real wealth is created. Not because one stock goes up 3% a year in revenue, but real wealth is created because of innovation. And innovation that takes you from the horse and buggy to the car, or who used to stand in line at Walgreens, wait for their pictures that were like $20, and then you get your pictures back 48 hours later and half of them were blank. So, that's wonderful innovation. No one can imagine waiting in Walgreens anymore. Everyone switched over to digital images. This will be true with food, because when you solve for this equation, creating more food, shorter amount of time, less damage, that's more nutritious, you'll see that everyone will go with that which is better for them and the planet. So, the solution to this problem, which is basically how do we feed the world without frying it, keeps coming up as plant-based innovation. So what the heck is that? Someone maybe has heard of a Beyond Meat burger. That's really not what we're talking about. Let's try in this conversation together to divorce media hype, the positive and the negative. We've all heard the great stories. We've all heard the rotten stories. Let's try to divorce media hype from the data. That's really the only way to solve this equation, is to focus on the data. So sure, there's Beyond Meat, and that's great. We can talk about it if you want. But really, we're looking at the entire global food supply system. Ag tech, right in the beginning. Precision watering, so we don't waste water. How do we make nutritious cover crops so that we better our soil, so that we get food closer to places so we don't waste energy? So starting all the way at the very beginning of the supply chain, this is a systems shift, everybody. Through the innovation, through the ingredients, through the flavor technology companies, all the way to, yes, a Beyond Meat kind of thing. You're going to see how much that's going to change when we talk about innovation and what products what technologies are out there that are getting investors like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Michael Milken. Why are they all investing billions into this? Why is China investing billions into this? I'm staying on track. Okay. Plant-based innovation. So it's that entire supply chain. We're not talking about the Beyond Meat burger. We're looking at the whole supply system. So why is plant-based innovation the solution? Why does that keep coming up as the solution? Well, we'll see that it's solving the problem. So what are some of the problems? According to the United Nations Environmental Program, right out of 2023 COP 2028, where I was speaking, the agricultural sector. Now, we think of climate change, we think, okay, electric vehicles are going to solve the problem and we're going to have renewable energy. You're not going to get there. Certainly not going to get there by 2030. You're not even going to get there by 2050 if you don't address this. Animal factories putting out 32% of the world's methane. Now, methane, one of the more nefarious of the greenhouse gases. Ooh, silver lining here. It's also one of the ones that has a shorter lifespan. So if you fix methane, you will see impact in your lifetime. Carbon is pretty much a done deal. That's going to stay in the air for hundreds of years. So these are some big numbers. And if we don't address them, you see that you're just not going to get there on changing fossil fuels alone. So 18% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions coming from the animal agriculture sector. These are big numbers. So we have climate change, global warming, methane. You've maybe heard of that. Maybe this has come up in your world. I don't know if this has come up in your world. 41% of the world's deforestation coming from this sector. Now, deforestation, the major cause for biodiversity loss. Biodiversity is the thread that holds our planet together. It's like trying to sew together a shirt, but you don't have the thread, or the thread's all disintegrated. That's what it's like when you lose biodiversity. So we're going to get to why exactly this is the leading cause of deforestation and biodiversity loss. But again, from the United Nations Environment Program, a large driver. Now, this is a tricky one. Our food system is causing food insecurity. How the heck does that work? Well, what we see is that, now we're back to business. Everyone focus on the business equation that we're solving together today. When we use our limited resources inefficiently, we don't have enough resources to make food for growing middle class in China, growing middle class in India, growing middle class in Africa. They want protein too. And as we look at, will it be beneficial for all concerned? It doesn't really work if only some people have food. So we have to focus on, remember, feeding more people more nutritiously, using fewer resources. According to the United Nations, we're going from 8 billion people to 10 billion people, but we're not getting more land and we're not getting more water. So we'll come back to the usage of, we'll come to it right now. Everyone, you're kind of cheating if you're with us virtually because you can pull out your reading glasses. Everybody here, I'm sorry for this. I don't know how to, can you see my, okay, you can at least see this. I don't know how to zoom in, but go here, and if you can't see here, I'm going to read it for you. 77% of our agricultural land is used to grow crops and graze livestock. That only gives us 18% of our calories. Basically, 80% of our land gives us 20% back, basically, give or take. Now, there's a silver lining there. 23% of our agricultural land gives us 82% of our calories in things that are great sources of protein, legumes and beans and veggies and whole grains and healthy diets, according to our doctors. So we see the misuse of land here. This is the slide. This is the slide of all slides, if you can remember this. So remember, we're talking about a business equation. We're not talking about we're talking about two things. We're talking about a business equation that we're solving today. We're also talking about making our current global food supply system more resilient. So we all saw in COVID, supply chain, really long food supply chain, fell apart pretty quickly. Ukraine war happened. We'll talk about it in a second. Wheat, it was really ran into problems. India started hoarding, and you see how quickly it falls apart. Why is that? Well, let's look at where we get our protein. Okay. Cows require 25 to 35 calories of feed to give us 1 calorie of cow. Pigs, 16 to 1. Chickens, 9 to 1. This comes from Our World in Data and the World Resources Institute. So who wants to invest $2.50 to get a dime back? Really bad calorie converters. Now, why would they be such bad calorie converters? Why do we have to put so much in to get such little back? Well, you've probably seen the videos of destroying the Amazon to cut down all the trees so that cows can graze. So what we do is we cut down trees, which we like to have because they pull carbon from the air and sequester. But okay, cut down those trees, grow crops that have fiber and protein. Are we giving that food to people? No, we're giving it to animals. Well, they need more land, water, and time. Cut down more trees, grow more crops that have fiber and protein. Are we giving that food to people? No, we're still giving it to animals. So that's the chunk of the supply chain that if we innovate with novel technology, we bypass that very expensive middleman, you're going to be able to feed more people with fewer resources. Side note, we all love meat. So what is this? Well, how's that going to work? I mean, no one's giving up their meat. That's right. No one's giving up their meat. How we make it, that's going to be different. So when I grew up, taco night was my very favorite night because it brought us all together. And I got to make it. It was a little creative. My father is Sicilian. My mother's the best cook on the planet, even though she's Irish, but the best cook on the planet. And she would make a Sicilian mac and cheese. So it would be like tuna and anchovies and olives in like Wisconsin cheddar cheese and pastas. Like I've never seen it anywhere else. It's great. Am I giving these things up? No, that's not the point. It's not that these things are going away. It's that we are diversifying our protein for resiliency. If you've ever looked at your investment portfolio and you say, hey, I'm going to be diversified so that I can have more options and have a more stable portfolio, that's what we're doing to the food supply system so we don't see what we saw during COVID. And we'll get to pandemic risk in a minute. So this is not going away, but we're bringing in more options to make the food supply system resilient. Okay, our last sort of stick, if you will, problem with our business equation. Our business equation, but if you're the CEO of JBS, you're looking at all of these numbers. Your doctor's probably told you cut back on the red meat. You're not alone. There's also growing concern, according to the United Nations, the top 2 reasons for the next pandemic, not the pandemic we're still in now, the next one, related to animal factories. Because if you're, butt to snout in on, your own existence of what you've just eliminated. It's just there's no way to protect from that. And there are 8 billion people on the planet. Take a guess. How many animals in factories? Somebody, a little bit of trivia. Somebody throw out a number. How many animals in factories? 10 billion is one number. Anybody else? 50 billion. Going for 50. Anybody else? 80. So 10 times more animals in factories than people on Earth. So when you have 90% of the planet living in conditions that aren't clean, that's the pandemic risk. There's also antibiotic risk. I don't know if you've heard of this, but the animals living in the conditions get antibiotics, and then we eat the meat. So you're seeing 70% of the world's antibiotics are resistant to 6 superbugs. Now, this is a problem because you can't do anything without antibiotics. Can't go to surgery, can't have children in hospitals. I mean, a world without antibiotics is a concern. So all of these sticks, all of these problems with our food supply system, maybe not for this room. This room's always going to have grass-fed beef. This room is great. But as we are concerned with, does it build goodwill and better friendships if we have food but others don't, it becomes a problem. So we look to diversify for a resilient food supply system, and we look to have other options. I mean, you go down the potato chip aisle, maybe, if you walk down that aisle, as I do, and I see baked and fried and salted and unsalted and gluten-free and yellow and blue and bags, no cans. I mean, there's so many chips, so many choices in the chip aisle. Why wouldn't we have that with our protein? So you're seeing a lot of innovators come to say, hey, grass-fed is an option, factory is an option, plant-based is an option, kicking it old school with the hippie burger, but maybe novel plant-based innovation like a Beyond Meat or there are others. But maybe we're going to even move into cultivated meat, fermented proteins. What does that look like? Milwaukee could be interested because it has to do with beer, and AB InBev is already deeply involved in fermenting proteins. Okay, but let's get one thing out of the way, just so that no one panics. Is the world going vegan? No one in their right mind thinks the world's going vegan. No, it's not going vegan. The world is not going vegan. I like vegans. I don't want to be disparaging. I am one. But let's be realistic. That group is 3%. They've always been 3%. They have no political power. They have no money. No one's going vegan. And that's not the goal. But we are trying to solve a mathematical equation together for better friendships that are beneficial for all. Food justice is a real thing. And as you have a growing population from 8 billion to 10 billion, and you have growing middle class in Africa, which is going to have huge growth in population, you're going to have to solve for more food, more nutritious, using fewer resources. So you look at this life cycle analysis from the University of Michigan. You can substitute any plant-based burger in here. It doesn't have to be Beyond Meat. You're talking about 99% less water, 93% less land, 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, 46% less energy. Huge overlap with energy and food. Why? Because we're shipping animals super heavy all around we ship to China. We ship live and dead pigs to China, Australia, live and dead sheep to the Middle East. I mean, we're shipping heavy. Just think if you could grains and chickpeas, lentils, these kind of clean proteins that, hey, if you want to kick it old school and have rice and beans, great. But there are people working on fava beans being the next cool steak. And if that doesn't fry your plant-based burger, people are working on growing you a steak right now that will bypass the animal. Steak will still exist. It's not going away. But we're working on these kind of numbers. Another study was done coming up with the same thing. 97% less water, 97% less land, 90% fewer greenhouse gases, and 37% less energy. So you're seeing these life cycle analyses really save on the things that we need. Okay, so I'm kind of talking to you. We're kind of looking at the data. We are not the only ones. Politicians don't get elected if they can't feed people. Food is becoming a big issue of national security. China is investing heavily in alternative proteins, diversified proteins. Why? We control China's food. You can't, and they only have 7% arable land for 1.4 billion people. You can't really you can't negotiate aggressively if your trading opponent controls your food. This is the same in the Middle East. Israel is concerned about their food, so is Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all investing very heavily here. Singapore, they rely 90% of their food, of course, comes out of Singapore. They suffered tremendously during COVID. So they are on a big push, 30 by 30, that they produce 30% of their own food by 2030, investing heavily in diversified proteins. Canada as well. I won't talk politics, but the U.S. is in there. We're going to be spending more. You see the Bezos Earth Fund at the very bottom of your screen. Bezos Earth Fund dropping $1 billion into food systems transformation. Michael Milken Institute doing similar numbers. Bill Gates has been doing this for a while. You may like them, you may not like them. It doesn't really matter. There's a big push coming out of COP28, big push for blended capital. Wall Street money, philanthropic money, World Bank money, government money. According to the World Bank, their food expert, you're going to see food tech considered climate tech, and governments around the world are going to start spending on food tech like they spend on climate tech. Why? Because food is responsible for 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. 18% of that is, not 18% of the 30, 18% of the 100 is coming from the animal sector. So, but doesn't get any of the climate tech funding right now. So you're going to see 300 to 500 billion invested in food tech every year for the next 10 to 15 years. That comes from the World Bank. Just looking at the time, and I'm doing well. Okay, so and then you just add inflation to this. Then you add like crazy climate change on top of it. So California had a lot of droughts the last couple of years. A lot of cows died. You're going to see beef inflation go up. This is where we're back to resilient supply chains. You're going to have something to replace beef if it becomes due to inflation, supply and demand, and not having enough beef. Prices rise. You have to have other sources of protein for people, again, or you really can't be elected into office. This is a big slide, lots to read here, but my main point is it isn't just governments, it isn't just the World Bank, it's industry. Who benefits from a shorter supply chain? Who benefits from a lower cost of goods sold? These status points don't come from me. I'm not trying to convince anybody. I'm just the messenger of the data. The person who cares about the data, who can have a better business bottom line, is JBS, Cargill, Nestle, Danone, Maple Leaf, and they're all investing in this area, and they're all asking government for money to invest in this area because they can then have R&D and make money. This is real wealth is created off of the innovation, not of stock going up or down. It's the real technologies that shift the world for people. So they want to own that story. That's the carrot. Because if they don't, look at number one here. Who has, raise of hands, because remember, we're solving this problem together today. Who has heard that the SEC is now demanding scopes 1 and 2 disclosures? Right, okay. Oh, yes, 1. Does anyone know what I mean when I say scopes 1, 2, and 3 disclosures? Okay. When emissions happen up and down the supply chain, they happen close to the end product, in the medium part of the supply chain, or way up the supply chain. Now, most of the emissions really happen in scope 3. California, now demanding scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. That means we're going to be able to see which businesses are the bad emitters. Well, as I started this, agriculture, one of the worst emitters. So that, and we're moving into a world of AI, a world of transparency. This means the consumer is going to know, where are my things made? Was it made with child labor or, animal factory? I don't know how some of these businesses survive in an AI world of transparency. So you have, again, these sticks. You also have the carrots. There's money to be made, and there's innovation, and innovation exists, and more technology exists, and we're going to innovate, we as a people. That's what we're doing here today. We're going to innovate ourselves out of this bad situation. And we are kind of heading for a critical storm here with food for all of the reasons we've discussed. So this slide is basically about industry. I really should have put a bunch of, Cargill logo here, JBS. They're interested in, this is going to go poorly for us. Okay, who else is interested? I don't have a lot of time, so I'll just say consumers, and particularly young consumers. They are interested in the transparency. They want to know where their food came from, and they're very focused on a healthier planet. Ultimately, they are the ones inheriting the planet and its trouble, and food is the low-hanging fruit, if you will. We started out talking that you're not going to fix it by fuel alone. You're not going to fix it with electric vehicles, not to mention you have to invest to build the electric grid for everyone to get electric vehicles. Talking about big CapEx spend, we'll talk about that in a second. So food, kind of a low-hanging fruit, which is why you're seeing Aramark and Sodexo. I don't know if you are familiar with those food service companies. They supply corporate cafeterias, university cafeterias, hospitals, schools, etc. They are doubling their clean protein from like 22% to about 42, 44%. Why? Well, because then the cafeteria, for no CapEx spend, just by changing out its food to some degree, not all, but just some of the food, more resilient, more options, they get a much lower carbon footprint. They get to turn those numbers into headquarters, one of the departments of the company, and every company has 2030 goals. No one's even close to meeting them. Your cafeteria is a really inexpensive way to do it, and that's what you're seeing here. So we've been talking about a lot of things today, and hopefully you're kind of retaining. We've got carrots, and we've got sticks, and we've got carrots, and there's a lot not going in our favor, but there are some bright spots about investment that make the major players, governments, and industry want to move this way. So if you're doubting sort of where we are with all of these numbers, let me tell you that Wall Street, which is as unemotional as you can be, Bloomberg Intelligence thinks that this sector is going from about 39 billion today to 166 billion by 2035-ish. Could be 2033, they say, 2034. Boston Consulting Group says 290 billion. They're a little bit more bullish. 290 billion by 2035. We don't have a lot of time to get into it, but here's some of the innovations that are coming. Will it be the Beyond Meat burgers of the world? No. Think of our food system, which has served us so well. I mean, I think of Taco Night for Me, served us so well. It's not working for us anymore. It's reached the end of its innovation curve. But now we're starting a new innovation curve, which is also going to serve us well, but it's just at the beginning. At Beyond Meat Burgers, like version 00001 of what we're going to be seeing out there in the world, which, by the way, doesn't always have to be, in a box with a barcode. Some people will kick it rice and beans, which did well by the Incas for years, so it doesn't always have to be that kind of product, but just again, we're talking about options and a resilient food supply system. So it's some of the plant-based innovation opportunities like fava bean, quinoa, chickpea. These things are all being used to create sausages and chicken wings and chicken breast and these kinds of things. Fermentation. So microbes, neither plant nor animal. You can make the same amount of protein of a cow in about 3 hours with microbes. You ferment microbes just like you do beer. Fermentation, been around forever. Bread, tea, beer, kimchi. I hate kimchi, but if you like kimchi, gross, but yeah, if you like kimchi, then, kimchi fermented. So fermenting technology's been around forever. You're going to see that really scale. And when the proteins come out, basically from, you can ferment mushrooms and potatoes and carrots and with some microbes, just basically is a blank slate. And you season that. Doesn't have to be, people panic a little bit like, it's going to be chemicals. No, this is the age-old fermentation. Very simple techniques. Season it with, tomatoes and olives, and back to my mother's Sicilian mac and cheese. You just natural flavors, rosemary, and then you have whatever kind of meat you want just from those microbes. That's going to come quickly. That's going to come in the next 5 years or so. Then you're going to move into cultivated meat, where you take the cell from the animal, just bypass the animal, because you don't want the blood and hooves and tail anyway, so just bypass the animal, grow the meat that you want. Now that's hard, growing muscle, bone. You've got a solid 10 years there. And I know people are saying, like, no way, that sounds weird. It does sound weird, but just hold on. Just see where we're going with this. I think it will take at least 10 years for cultivated meat, but you're going to see cultivated fat, which would be very much more simple to kind of brew, again, ferment, work on the technology to take the cell and get the animal fat and then apply that to your, I'll just pick it out of a hat, black bean burger. Now you're having the nutritional profile, not the cholesterol, not the saturated fat, you've brought that down quite a bit, not the antibiotics, not the hormone, not the trimethylene N oxide, not the animal heme, getting rid of all that so your doctor's very happy, but you're getting that taste and mouthfeel. So lots of innovation coming down. I wish we had more time to go into that, but I'll just bring your attention to this 111% here. So that's the fermentation part of it. It's technology that exists. It's, you'd already do it in the pharma industry, for example, in the beer industry. So technology already exists. That's going to come to market sooner. And that's maybe of interest to Milwaukee. So Boston Consulting Group says, well, okay, if you were to invest in electric vehicles, alternative building materials, renewable energy, or food, which would be the best for your green portfolio of investment? And they're saying it's 3 times to 40 times more impactful to invest in diversified proteins. And the reason for this, the CapEx spend is so much less. You get to market faster, you have impact faster. So it's, here's another kind of projection of where we're going. This is Synthesis Capital. It's really tiny here, but it's A.T. Kearney, Barclays, Credit Suisse, Ernst & Young, Boston Consulting Group, Jefferies, kind of UBS, plotting this where everybody thinks that, now these all of these organizations think the food system is changing. So just to tell you that it's not, me alone, for example. And they're just plotting when they think it's going to be this S curve. There's S curve adoption when people adopt things en masse when it's more convenient and it's cheaper. And if you've knocked out the taste and texture, if you can give people the same thing for less that has less destruction, remember what we're salivating here today. More food that's more nutritious, using fewer resources, causing less damage. If you can do that, people take it, and that's what this chart shows. So again, I'm just giving different voices, all kind of pointing in the same direction, and that I think is a source of a mega trend. When you have everybody wanting the same outcome, so you have industry wants the same thing as government, wants the same thing as major foundations, wants the same thing as the World Bank, wants the same thing as consumers. So I go to the former co-CEO of Whole Foods, Rob Walton, who was on my podcast, and he said the move to plant-based foods is the biggest trend I've seen in the 40 years I've been doing this. It's a mega trend akin to digitization. And I would say that this is true in terms of jobs and growth as well. So as we bring back semiconductors, for example, to the United States, we're seeing that kind of infrastructure being built so that we can compete competitively and we can be aggressive in our trade negotiations. Hard to do that if everybody else has your electric car batteries and your semiconductors. So as we bring that intelligence back to the United States, you're going to see we're going to be protective about food and do the food IP here as well. We're back to that national security issue. If you done any of these things, maybe you've heard of NVIDIA. Well, the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, says protein synthesis is going to be huge. This was recently on an interview on CNBC. Okay, so how does all of this pertain to Milwaukee? I'm wrapping up here as we get to questions. Well, beer is fermented, and you see our friends to the south. Evergreen is a company from AB InBev. Anheuser-Busch already focusing on fermenting proteins. They've got the technology to ferment beer. Huge market in food, as we discussed early on. Why not also ferment proteins? They're doing that, as well as, we didn't even have time to talk about it today, but a huge source of emissions is food waste. So if you upcycle beer barley, you're getting rid of those emissions in the waste. So they're upcycling beer barley to make barley milk, plant-based milks. Just FYI, 65% of the world is lactose intolerant. That's going to be much higher in the African communities and the Asian communities. So a lot of people can't handle cow's milk. So already you're built into a market that plant-based milk's about 15% of the global milk market. So, barley milk coming online as a way to address that market, get more revenue, upcycle from waste. And then they're also focusing on BioBrew, which is brewing diversified proteins out of barley. So kind of fun and cool there. And you get all of these synergies. So you're not just saving energy, you're also, when you're not monocropping soy and corn, Again, 90% of the living, breathing entities on the planet are eating the same, we make the soy for them. It's not for plant-based products or something. We monocrop soy for animals and those crops because of the numbers. So, if we could stop monocropping, you'd have much healthier soils. These cover crop soils are better. So, and here's Molson Golden. So now our neighbors to the north, Coors Molson Golden, they're also coming out with barley milk golden wings. So, I think I'm on time and we're about to take questions. But key takeaways is you're having a shift because everybody wants the same thing at the same time. And all of the key players see that it's not working. There's maybe one key player that doesn't see that it's working, and that would be the meat lobby, not even the meat industry. It would be the meat lobby that just wants to be sure that they keep those subsidies. And they're going to keep those subsidies. Who are we kidding? They feed everyone. No one's taking those subsidies away. They're going to shift not to be subsidies that plug the hole of a business equation that's no longer working, but subsidies that shift to the innovation that create real wealth while solving the problem of feeding more people more nutritiously using fewer resources while causing less damage. It's a lot. I think we're taking questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. If you do have a question for Elizabeth, we have time for just a few, and you can use this microphone here. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for coming. You mentioned, billionaires, Cargill, the CCP, government. Is there a fear of concentrating more power with these people instead of promoting local initiatives? Because we're talking about food security. A lot of people don't trust those group of people, and maybe cutting the red taping, allowing people to farm locally more sustainably, may be another answer.
Yes, gosh. Yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. What I tried to, again, so much to get through here in a short amount of time, but I tried to express that this is diversifying, not replacing. Certainly the world's not going vegan, and certainly the world is not getting rid of local farmers. In fact, this is great for local farmers. Most small farms have been bought up by huge, large corporations that many people don't trust and they don't want to see. Who sequesters? I mean, besides AI? Farmers. They're the only ones that can sequester. So they're in an enormous position of power should they use to negotiate that way. And no, every local community needs to have its robust local system, but it won't work for everything. It won't work for all kinds of foods, and it won't work for Mumbai, Nigeria, Mexico City. So this community is always going to have local farmers. But as we focus on feeding the world, you have to have both systems in play. So, and then it's a separate, I want to answer this next question, but I'll just say, and it's kind of a separate equation, this concentration of power. So do we want local in terms of global systems at play? Yes. But what about that power concentrated in the hands of few? Take it to your politicians. I mean, I agree. I'm giving you the data and I'm showing you the trends. This is happening. There's no question this is happening. Might have the years wrong a little bit, but what we have now isn't feeding everybody. So this is changing. Who's got that power? Take it to your elected folks.
Thank you very much. A lot of food for thought.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Decades and decades ago, it seemed like we were assaulted for a while about the population time bomb and the need for zero population growth. And I don't know if that discussion disappeared. Maybe we solved the problem, but it doesn't seem like it. World population is still exploding. The question, I guess, is do you see some kind of control on the growing world population as a part of the solution that you're talking about? And if so, is it realistic to think that the world can cooperate on that? The sensitive issues involved in trying to have something less than the current population growth.
The key word there is collaboration. Do you think the world collaborates right now? I don't know. I don't see collaboration in the human spirit at the moment. Although that can change. I think it's hard. It's sort of like, family control. It's such a hard issue. I don't think so. I don't think so. But I think some of these things do resolve themselves naturally. So we're going from 8 billion people to 10 billion people by 2050, and then it's coming down. So, as people get busier lives and AI helps their lives, they have less children. I don't know, it was maybe a political issue. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just saying I think our lives will shift and population could come down after 2050, but we're having more people in the world be wealthier, which means they want better food and more often and different kinds of foods and more nutritious foods. And so even when you fix for population, you don't fix for the demand on meat globally. I don't know if I'm answering you really.
Very provocative talk. In the context of behavior change, we've seen some efforts by government to change behavior on energy, production, consumption, utilization, from a regulatory standpoint, fiscal incentives and disincentives. Food, in many cases, is a very personal choice, Sicilian, Norwegian, what have you. Where do you see it going? Where do you see government going in terms of encouraging a behavior change on the part of the food consumer, from a fiscal, from a regulatory standpoint especially?
There's a great institute called the Good Food Institute, and they always say it comes down to price, taste, and convenience. I am 100% convinced it comes down to price, price, and price. So I think government is going to not focus on shifting consumer behavior. They're going to fund R&D, as are the billionaires that we're talking about, as are the industries, JBS, et cetera. They're coming together to fund it, to scale the innovation, to bring the price down, and the consumer's going to want to naturally go there. It's going to meet that price. It's going to have all the front of label, better for the environment, saving CO2. It's going to have social media behind it, as it already does with the younger generations. And consumer behavior is going to naturally go to that which is more acceptable. Again, AI pushing for cleaner supply chains, better for the planet, and it's going to be cheaper. Price.
This will be our last question.
I hate to sound like a money guy, but what about some investment ideas that would take advantage of this upcoming change?
Oh my gosh, this segue, it's too good. I have an ETF on the New York Stock Exchange called EAT-V, and we are the only ETF focusing exactly on this solution from the very start of the supply chain with ag tech all the way through ingredients, novel technologies, flavor, texture, all the way to the end products in food and in materials, because ultimately if you're making less beef, you're making less leather. No one needs to doubt the environmental hazard that is a tannery. So, and it also acts as diversification in the fund. So, what now? A great question. Why is there only one? There are other food ETFs. They're just not focused on sustainability. They're not focused on the novel innovations. And just to answer that, because you seem to know, so we're an all cap, small, medium, and large cap. We're not a nano cap, like small innovation dream house. No, we're focused on the good actor, the man who asked that question about bad actor food companies. I wish you were still here. We're focused on the good actor companies, large companies, Ingredion, Givaudan. And there are good actor food companies in the food industry, and they're innovating and spending R&D, and they're well placed for when the market turns. We're in a tricky market. I mean, look at inflation. Who's going to spend more on a plant-based product when we're all suffering with inflation? But you wait till that market turns and everyone starts focusing on food. That's coming, folks. 25, 26, 2025, 26. So then you're going to really see the market turn, and probably more products will come up. But we're really leading it and kind of owning it.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, everybody.